Tennessee is a very experienced football team. What? Doesn't it feel like this is just year 3 of a rebuild and based off old school college football, which is really just 5, 6, 7 years ago, that Tennessee should be rebuilding and should have an experience issue? Well, they don't. 18 of 22 starters could be seniors. Caleb, this is something that was addressed by 247 Sports. Pretty stunning when you look at 18 of 22 starters could be the seniors. And I don't want to get into my hinting that 2024 is going to be the year to best judge Josh Heupel. We can do that later. But first of all, what do you make of that number? That's a pretty big number. What the H?
Yeah, it totally shocked me. So for those who want to check it out, it's another one by our friend Brad Crawford, who does a ton of work. We cite him a lot here because he does a lot of great work, quite honestly. And this one talks about what insider sources are saying about each SEC team. And so with Tennessee, we've been hearing all the talk about Joe Milton, Squirrel White, and the receivers, and kind of all the stuff you expect to hear. But the underrated part was that Tennessee low-key once again is loaded with experience despite losing a ton of experience last year. And I went back and thought about it, and this is still going to be a thing, by the way, for at least one more year, which is the COVID eligibility of 2020 has had so many players come back for 5th and 6th years of eligibility. You have the same thing going on right now with Tennessee. And Joe Milton himself, for instance, coming back with and taking advantage of the 5th year of eligibility. Jalen McCullough in the secondary, and I think that's going to be a big help to them. What's underrated is where the real talk is we didn't think about this, but they are reportedly much more experienced on defense this year than they were last year. As a matter of fact, according to this article, insiders expect Tennessee to finish in the top 6 of the SEC defensively this year, based on how experienced they are on defense, which if they do that and this offense doesn't miss a beat, I mean, Dave, then you have to start talking national championship possibilities, right?
You do. And I do want to be really careful with this because, listen, you're right. Brad does a great job and he's reputable. And I think that these talking to coaches things, which I do, and I drop hints of coaches I talk to all the time on the program. I don't get on here, just make stuff up. So that you're hearing it from I would like to think of a good source, and you're hearing it from somebody that's in the know. I'm not talking about me, but the people I talk to. So, but the scary part about these things, Caleb, is that could another coach try to raise the bar on an up-and-coming program like a Tennessee or like a South Carolina to put a little bit more heat on them? Like Urban Meyer saying that Texas was the most talented team in the nation. I think Urban Meyer, if something happened to Steve Sarkisian, would take that job tomorrow. I think he raised the bar publicly on purpose. So I do have that concern. And when we factor in the COVID year as far as seniors, yeah, some of them are seniors, but I think Jacob Warren has been a senior 3 times. This will be his 3rd tour as a senior. So that's a little goofy too. But I think that coaches have already started to raise the bar publicly, and they don't give their names necessarily here. But I think you're going to see that, and you're going to see that at SEC Media Days. You're going to hear some coach somewhere talk about how great, and I'm lumping together Tennessee and South Carolina, how great their quarterback play can be this year, how great their offenses were at times last year. And I think that's coaches trying to raise the bar. I'm not sure who that'll be, but I think you'll see some of that at SEC Media Days. Maybe not spring meetings, which is ongoing. Thoughts?
Maybe with that top 6 defense, but in terms of the 18 of 22, I mean, that's just analytically, that's just factually true. Right. And so it's hard to look past it. I mean, last year, I said this going into last year, which was, we keep forgetting like what the state of Tennessee was in people's minds last year. But I said, expect a 5-0 start. And people said I was crazy. I said, expect a 5-0 start because of how the schedule lays out when they play at Florida and LSU and Pittsburgh, kind of changing quarterbacks. But also because Tennessee last year had so much returning talent. I mean, playing together for a year in that system means a lot. And this year, again, they're low-key flying under the radar. Now, what's more valuable, Dave? And I would ask you, and this is actually a genuine question: the actual experience of a player, or the number of years a team has played together? The cumulative experience of a team, like freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, or the number of years they've played together with each other?
Well, I think the number of years they played against each other, but that's not really a thing anymore with the transfer portal. I mean, nobody's going to say, if Dante Thornton comes in and catches 20 passes for 200 yards this season, nobody's going to say, well, he didn't have enough time to work with Tennessee's offense. I mean, that sounds like an excuse almost to me. I mean, the game is way different. So 5 years ago, I would have told you, absolutely, these guys need to play together and no chemistry, but that's not what anybody's looking for nowadays. They're looking for guys to come in and have an immediate impact.
And I hear that a lot, but then I think last year, okay, yes, Brew McCoy was the number 2 receiver, but if Cedric Tillman doesn't get hurt, Cedric Tillman and Jalen Hyatt would have both had more receiving yards than Brew McCoy. So outside of Brew McCoy, it was everybody that really contributed last year was on the team the year before. That was a significant player.
That's true. But you bring up the Brew thing. Okay, Brew coming over was late to get started in August. Okay, because he wasn't cleared. We didn't know until 7-8 days before the season started that he was going to be able to play after the transfer from Southern California. So Dante Thornton is going to be a more typical type of prospect that comes in early, at least the summer, if not mid-season, and gets to go through spring camp. So that to me is the exception to the rule. Sure, you would love to have guys that transfer and you could mold for 2 years like they'll have with Brew, but I don't think they're going to have that with most of the guys they bring in, whether we're talking about Peely or Thornton or whoever it might be. I think the goal is to get 1 good year out of them. If you get 2, that's great. Now, I'm not talking about the guys that come up from the group of 5. I'm talking about the guys that are already bona fide stars that want to get paid. And that's what Dante Thornton is. And he just wants to get paid. So he's getting paid. You're not going to get 2 years out of those guys, are you?
I shouldn't think so. You might with Dante only because he might be a little bit buried in the depth chart this year, so he has to come back the next year. That's the real smart move for Josh Heupel, is to bury these guys just enough for a year where they get some yards, but not a lot of yards, so their NFL draft stock's not high enough, so they come back another year. I mean,
well, I mean, you joke, but that is something that was done previously when coaches, not with transfers so much, but when coaches had some leverage, that was something that was done. I don't think they have that leverage now. I think Dante Thornton, not specifically him, I don't know that young man, but I think a top prospect like that would say, okie dokie, you didn't find a place for me and I came in January, then I'm cruising on out in the next January. I think that's what would happen. And he'd go to Miami was in the running. There were other schools in the running. I mean, heck, he could go back to Oregon and get a better paycheck if they got the right guy lined up. So I don't think that's going to happen. And remember this too, there is pressure on Josh Heupel to play the guys that got a price tag via the transfer portal. So it's not like it used to be where the coach has all the power, which for the most part, I'm a big fan of. I don't think the coach should have absolute power. But in this particular case, it allows the kid to make some really questionable decisions. Not necessarily Dante, but if somebody bolts after a year, Caleb, that ain't great for anybody.
No, unless that's the 1 year you win the national title and, then you're going to take it. But I mean, I get your point. I would say that the question with Tennessee this year, though, the reason I asked that question, experience versus historical team chemistry, is this year they're relying on more transfers than last year. Not when I say transfers, 1 year just transferred into the program this year. Last year, almost their whole team, even the transfers, had been in the program for a couple of years. Again, like I said, Brew McCoy and Gerald Mincy, I think, were the only 2 transfers from the previous year that were major contributors. If anybody wants to correct me, I could be forgetting somebody. I'm spouting this off the top of my head. But this year, we're talking Dante Thornton, Andres, like at least 2 offensive linemen, probably Keenan Peely, Gabe Judy Lally. These are all transfers that they're probably going to have to rely on this year significantly as part of their rotation and weren't on the team last year. So you wonder, is that going to mess things up a little bit more than what was on the team, than what happened last year?
No, it could. I mean, and you also have to, and on our message board, somebody pointed this out. I bet Joe Milton is getting a ton as well. Well, he should. He certainly should. You shouldn't pay everybody a premium rate that comes in without taking care of the guys that are already there. I think it was pretty obvious that Hendon Hooker got taken care of. He had the Mercedes-Benz endorsement that came along in November. So they were continuing to work for him, even though they knew what they were going to get the rest of the season. That's a really solid player. They didn't know about the injury and a really good leader. So you've got to continue to work for those guys. I completely agree with that. And if Joe Milton's not a millionaire by now, he should be, because he's the guy that's going to lead your program next. And I think most of these guys, especially at quarterback, are going to be in the $1 million range.
And we can bet that Keenan Peely's not going to fight him over that. Sorry.
Yeah, and that's the one thing that was quickly put to bed about the whole NIL thing. Not to get sidetracked, but people told me that, well, I mean, Cooper Mays said it on our YouTube channel a year ago almost. He said, nobody's going to look at the quarterback and be jealous of him because he's the quarterback. He also got the most chicks in high school. He gets the better deals in the NFL. I mean, what's different? The quarterback is the quarterback, Caleb.
Yeah, that's like when you're sitting. I mean, if you're a higher up person in a corporation and you're high up in management and making a 6-figure salary, you're not going to complain that the CEO is making $1 million salary. He's the CEO. I mean, that's how it is.
The CFO doesn't look at his paycheck and says, I deserve more. Well, if you deserve more, then become the CEO. Rocky Top Tom said the entire NIL setup is the worst thing that ever happened to college sports. I'm going to take you a step further, and I'm not going to argue with that, but I think that players deserve to get some cash. So I'm going to say this for you, Rocky Top Tom. I think the NCAA is the worst thing to happen to amateur athletics. I think they allowed this to happen. They could have found some sort of stipend. They could have allowed the players to unionize so that they had them all under one collective, but they didn't do that. They're the ones who blew it. In the end, capitalism was what ultimately led to this. And if you don't like it, I certainly understand. Is it completely different? Yes. Absolutely. No doubt about it. I get that, but that's where we are.